You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Music Tectonics, the podcast that goes beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host for this episode, Tristra Newyear Yeager, Director of Strategy at Rock Paper Scissors, the music innovation PR firm. Today, I'm looking back at the crazy whirlwind that was 2022 with Maarten Walraven, who is the co-editor of the Music X newsletter, which you all need to sign up for, by the way, if you don't get it already. It's an amazing read. Maarten is also a scholar of the history of sound and head of operations at Symphony, the video platform for streaming orchestral music. Hi, Maarten. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be back here.
You're also a podcast host, we should mention to everyone. Can you give everybody a quick intro to your podcast? Because it's pretty new on the music discussion scene.
Yes. So I have a podcast called Appetite for Distraction. It's a very recent endeavor, as you say. I was at Future Music Forum in Barcelona in late September. And I did a thing they do there called a mic drop, which is like a short 10-minute intro, like we did together with Yash Bagal. I did that to introduce like the Web3 strand of that conference. And then afterwards, people came up to us and they said, that was cool. You should do that as a podcast. So now we do that as a podcast.
Endlessly dropping that mic. Well, cool. I'm really glad you can join me today on our podcast. And I really wanted to dig into some of the stuff you've been exploring and some of your colleagues have been exploring on Music X. And the first thing, I kind of warned you about this because this is a big and somewhat gnarly topic. But there are a few buzzwords that have been swarming around in 2022 about, sort of floating in the music innovation of sphere among the commentariat. And one of them has been community. So community, I hear that all the time. And I'm wondering if together we could dig in a little bit and talk about what we mean when we say community in music. So how do you usually imagine community? That's a tough question, but go for it.
It is a tough question. I'm also probably one of the people that keeps shouting about community.
Yeah, exactly. So now the shoe's on the other foot, Maarten.
Yeah. I think part of this comes from the idea that the internet is going to give way to much more fairer distribution of revenues and of possibilities for independent creators, artists. And this goes to that amazing 1,000 true fan theory, where if everybody would just pay you, or if 1,000 people would just pay you $10 a month, you would have a good yearly income that you could live off. The problem with those theories, and something that we've been grappling with as a kind of music industry for the last couple of years, is how do you find those people, right? And how do they find you? I think when you have them, so when you have a community, then it's really, really obvious. And the gnarliness of the concept is really, how do you start one? Which is why I always try to encourage people to just get started with just a few people, and just to see how you can grow that, right? How do you go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16? And then when you get to that number, that's sort of when you have to start paying attention to how do you manage those people? How do you manage that community? When does it really become a community? Because one of the definitions is that people will start interacting together, right? You with this podcast have an audience. I with Music X have an audience. You might get some reactions, but you definitely don't have readers, listeners who start to interact together and come up with new ideas of stuff that they could do. And that's sort of when a community really becomes a community, when that starts happening. You can plan for that, and you can do a lot of things for that. But in the end, it's down to the people that are in there to make that work. And then, it's up to them as well to start bringing in new people. And then you get a little bit of that network effect. And that's when a community can really start to grow and flower.
I love that you're kind of bringing up this idea of maybe seeding a community. So whether we're talking about, running a business or doing a creative project, how have you seen some interesting approaches to that sort of seeding? So like laying the groundwork. So if people do engage with what you're putting out there, stuff starts to take off.
If you look at sort of independent musicians who are doing this on their own, for them it's really about sort of their creative process, because it has to fit within that process, right? So if you're somebody who likes to share a lot about what you're doing, then that's probably where you would start, right? It's like, hey, I'm in the studio, I'm making some new music. You're sharing some videos, you're sharing some audio, you're sharing some photos, that sort of stuff. If you're more somebody who doesn't share so easily, then maybe you could do something totally different, like ask for people to share what they're doing, right? And then that's sort of multiple ways that you can sort of start seeding that enthusiasm and those reactions among those people. But yeah, you really just need a couple to get started, and I think that's super important to realize, that you can just start a community with just a few people, and then you'll see as well, when you have more people in your community, that you'll have smaller groups that start to sort of coalesce and become these little groups of like 3, 4, 5 people that you may have had in the beginning, and that will then go and do stuff on their own, to support whatever it is that you're doing.
Once you have things started, once things have started to take off in this little community, and maybe you even have a few groups that have coalesced, what can you do as an artist or as a creative person to keep giving people more of what they might be able to use to continue that community? How can you nurture that community?
Again, I think this is very personality dependent. You'll find hopefully that you have 1 or 2 people in your community who will also help you with this, who will ask other people how they're doing, I don't know. I'm reminded of Black Dave, who is a rapper who is quite well known in the whole music NFT ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Because so he has a social token, so there's no monetary value attached to it. It's purely about status. And you get that even when you're in his Discord. You can get that token by just asking other people genuinely, how are you doing, So I think that after maybe not even that many people, maybe when you get to like 10 people, you will already have other people in that group who will also start to seed the reactions from the rest.
So basically, Black Dave has set it up so you're supposed to just reach out to another random person in the community and be like, hey, what's up? And that's how you get the social token?
That's already how you can get the social token. There's many other ways, but that's just one of them.
That's really cool. And that's like such a small little thing that, when people talk about things like utility and community, especially in Web3, it's easy to miss how simple it can be and how human, right? It feels like super accessible and just really friendly and kind of fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it should be playful in a way as well. And not to use like a massively big word, but you could think about gamification, right? You could think about gamifying all of that stuff a little bit, so that it's fun for people to do, so that it triggers, their brains and all these things that are happening there, so that they will get like happy reactions when they do something, or when other people do something and they can participate in it. And I don't want to start overthinking that too much, but there are plenty of ways that you can do that, right? And a lot of social tokens should do that, because there is no real monetary value attached to them. So you need to you can express status with that, and maybe there's issues around governance that you can vote on using those tokens, but mostly it's just sort of a fun way to interact with each other, and you can go down the route of like, hey, but I have more than you, and it's all
Yeah.
a lot of things go when you go down that route.
Well, I also think there's a lot of human needs or human interests that can, a lot of itches that can be scratched by these social tokens that say governance may not have as much attraction for. Like, right, so people it's not as appealing for people to be like, I am going to vote on a proposal. Maybe for some people that's exciting. I think they're probably a small minority of humanity, but most humans love either competition or fun ways that they can kind of map their own progress, or interesting, just getting a sense of like we're doing something together and there are these stages that we're going through. I think that's a really cool thing to point out that was widely discussed, at least in the general music innovationist sphere.
Yeah, and I mean we see this in the major fandoms as well, right? I mean, if you look at the Beehive or the Swifties or the Army or what, you name them, every major pop artist has one.
Yeah.
Then there's always people who say, but why did they do it? They don't get anything out of it. I was like, well, they get a lot of satisfaction out of it.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, like, what hobby do you have? And how much money do you spend on that hobby? This is sort of super similar to that. And these super fans just get that satisfaction out of it. And then when you go back to the kind of the more independent artists, then you think, okay, so, you want to nurture those super fans, but you also want to make sure that there's like a revenue model coming out of that. So you have to think about sort of the financialization of that fandom, because it's supposed to sustain you and your creativity moving forward, right?
It's interesting to think about what people get out of it. And in the end, I mean, really tight fandoms, like if we're talking about, historically the Grateful Dead or the Juggalos more recently, it almost functions like a mutual aid society. So once a fan identifies another fan, they will let you can surf, you can couch surf, you can to get a ride to a show. They'll give you a meal. Like there's all sorts of sort of, aid going around, like almost it should be the envy of a lot of leftist organizers. For example, the way some of this all comes together.
Yeah, people like to do stuff for each other, and if you don't know somebody and you're walking across the street and they say like, hey, can I do something for you, you probably go like, oh no. But if you both happen to be wearing the same baseball cap from the same band, then you'd probably go like, oh hey, I like the Grateful Dead too, or I like I don't know, the Rolling Stones as well, whatever.
Yeah. So let's take it back even a little bit further. I know you've done some research into working class communities and how sound and music played a role in their formation. And I'm wondering if there are some things from the past that we can pull out and present to the future. Web3 sometimes, and a lot of technological innovation has a tendency to have this sort of ahistoric, almost like this innovation fallacy, right? Where they're like, oh, this is all new. This has never been done before. This is this whole big new thing. And that may be like a byproduct of just the sheer enthusiasm that you need to have as someone spearheading a new technology or pushing for its greater integration into social practice or whatever. But I think that there is a lot of history and backstory to this idea of community. Obviously, that's not widely brought into the conversation. And so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Maarten, as a fellow historian, and say, like, are there some things that have come to mind? I mean, we've talked a little bit back and forth about the co-op movement in the 19th century. Are there some other things that sort of we can look back to for historical reference and maybe for some ideas or better understanding of how these communities function?
So, I mean, if you are talking about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, you have to understand cooperatives because they're basically the same thing in a new jacket. And if you think about other examples, I mean, there's so many examples of people organizing themselves in local environments, right? And I think that's sort of an important part. So if you look at those working class communities that I looked at in my PhD, they all worked in the same in the same mines or in the same factories, and they were faced with the same problems, and they worked together to find not ways to solve those problems, because they didn't have enough, strength in the whole power dynamic relationship that existed to actually change that, but they made workarounds, and people are just really good at that, especially when they work together. So one of the things I showed is that in those factories in Manchester in the UK, it was super loud, and where historians have always said, bunch of white noise, period. I started to research sort of the acoustics and the way that people behaved in there, and the way that these machines worked, and then was able to show that people could hear whether their machine was functioning correctly, and they would also hear when it wasn't functioning correctly. So they would pay attention to the sound, but then were able to do other things to communicate with people that were around them. And it's a super basic example, of course. And I think that when you then take those notions and those ideas to where we live now in a super digital age, that's when you kind of see, that the issue of local changes quite a lot, because we're on the internet and we have all these new media as our infrastructure around which we kind of coalesce. But whether it's Discord or Twitter or Lens or whatever it is, there's always something where you can create this feeling of localness to other people, and it's something that's super necessary for a community to start to seed, to come out, and to grow.
I love it. So the digital proximity effect.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, that is a lot to think about, and we're going to take a quick break to let people ponder that. We'll be right back in just a second.
What's up, beautiful listeners? I've got a question for you. What do you want to hear next? Let me know at pages.musictectonics.com/feedback. Suggest future guests and music tech topics you want to hear us cover, and tell us how we're doing. Again, that's pages.musictectonics.com/feedback. Look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, we're back. We're back here with Maarten Walraven. And now I'd love to talk to you a little bit more, Maarten, about what's going on from an artist's perspective. On this podcast, we talk a lot about tech, about innovation, often from a more, platform, music making type perspective, but we don't get a lot of time to talk about artists per se. So you've written a lot about that in the last couple of months, and honestly, just looking back at 2022, we seem to be in one of those kind of Dickensian moments, meaning it's the best of times and the worst of times for musicians and for artists and producers and songwriters. So, what gives? What's going on? What might change and bring us to a better future where we land more on the best of times side?
Oh gosh, that's a big question.
Yeah, just can you solve all the music business problems, please?
So there's a lot of potential for things to get better, or at least there's a lot of opportunities for people to make their own path, right? And to do that in a way that they have ownership over what they do, and they have ownership over where their music goes, and etc. etc. But then when you talk about the sort of the worst of times part, that's probably more in the sense that, how do we make sure that we don't fall into the same sort of systems that we already have, right? And the music industry is, how should I say this? We have a lot of, there's a lot of centralization of power, right? Historically in the music industry. And there's a lot of talk now about decentralization. But we also know that a lot of this decentralized platforms are not necessarily super decentralized, right? There's still a lot of centralization going on there. And I mean, if anybody listening is super interested in it, definitely look into what Blair Michael has been writing and sharing about this. We need to make sure that we don't fall back into the sort of the traps that we've set in the last couple of decades in the music business.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point, Maarten, which is there's this weird dynamic where on the one side you have the people who are in power, and there's a certain amount of inertia and also lack of recognition perhaps of how powerful they are, right? They don't see themselves as exercising power, even though they are exercising power. On the other hand, you have folks say coming from the Web3 space who are like, yay, oh my gosh, decentralization is the magic. It's like this sort of, I don't know, philosopher's stone that's going to unlock all this cool stuff if only we can decentralize. But if you take the power understanding out of it, not to be too like get all Michel Foucault here, but like, if you take the power understanding out of it, you don't have a way to actually unpack the power and distribute it, right? Like, I guess I hope this is making sense, but you see what I'm getting at? Like, there's a lot of sort of enthusiasm on one side that's sort of like, if we only decentralize, magically power will no longer be a real issue, and it'll all just sort of magically sort of flow out to the people who are creating things, for example. On the other hand, you have this incredible institutional inertia that may or may not want to cede power, but doesn't even want to admit that it has power per se.
Yeah, or and if you look at the major labels, they're definitely happy to say that they have power. But then if you look at the way that they engage with new technologies, they're so big that they can just say, I'm going to set up a sub label to explore this, and well, screw it. So then you end up in situations where you, like, I was in the launch of probably a label, the whole Warner thing. So this is Warner's play into Web3, and they do this launch, and it's on Twitter Spaces, and there's quite a lot of people there. So that's good. There's excitement, and then they don't use the word music. They hardly use the word music, and they kept talking about intellectual property and saying things like, "Hey, come and pitch us your intellectual property."
Weird.
And then you go like. Music is a bit more than that.
Yeah.
And the people who create it, the musicians, are also, you start undervaluing them if you only say that they create intellectual property. And then, you see that as well in the hyperbole that sits around all the AI stuff that is happening right now. Where, you have all these people saying, well, that's it. There we go. We now have super intelligent AI, and they're going to take all our jobs. And there's so much devaluation of what humans do and what artists do in that sort of thinking, and that riles me up.
I completely understand. What always gets me, Maarten, is this sort of lack of understanding of, AI can spit out some tones and, maybe add some chords, do some cool stuff. However, the people who make the meaning are the listeners, right? And so if, you can have AI kind of put stuff together, but without that sort of relationship between the sound and the listener, there's nothing, right? It has no meaning. It's sort of bizarre that we're focused so much on the production of the sound itself and not on the production of the music, which is the meaning, right?
Yeah, I mean, that you're totally right. The meaning exists in the relationship that people get with the music. As an artist, you can write a song and you can put it out, and then somebody can listen to it and take something totally different from it. And that's cool. That's fantastic. That's how that stuff works. That's why we all love music so much, because we can also put our own emotions in there, and we don't just necessarily have to be taking the prescriptive, this is a song about, my grandfather dying, and somebody listens to it and thinks, oh, this is the best love song ever.
Or yeah, exactly. That's the cool thing about music in particular is it can have many, many layers of meaning much more easily than some other like artistic media.
Yeah. And I mean, this is always where the hope sits as well, right? For just go back to your question about the best of times. Is that as long as we can create those spaces where the artist and the music they make can find the people that want to listen to it, I think that's just going to stay the biggest sort of problem that we all want to solve in the next couple of years as well. It's the issue of discovery. So how do you find all those many, many people that make music? Because there are so many people that make music.
Yeah.
100,000 tracks released every day on DSPs. There's millions and millions and millions and millions of projects started every month on apps like BandLab, and there's so many tools out there for people like me, who's not a musician, to also start working. There's Boomi, there's endless amounts of applications where you can just play around with, and then at the end you have something that sounds pretty much like music. So there's millions, if not a billion, people who are making music, and they, most of them probably deserve an audience, and not all of them are going to find one. And then we come back to that question of community, because the potential of that sort of 1,000 true fan, 100 super fan theory is that you don't need that large an audience to kind of sustain yourself. But then you do need to sort of not have to be ultra present, 24/7, showing up everywhere. You also need to be able to kind of make your music and to do all the things that you need to do to be a human and all that sort of stuff. So I think if we can work towards a balance in those things, then we're up for that brighter future.
I'm wondering, and this is me somewhat thinking aloud, if maybe we need to figure out a taxonomy for who we are as we create. So maybe we need to get rid of this idea that to really make something, you have to follow a very particular professionalized, monetized path, right? Like maybe there's going to be, and maybe that we're not all going to be individuals or creating something unique and finished. Almost feel like we're still really locked into a lot of 19th century categories in terms of, you have to be an individual, you're an artist with a capital A, there's sort of genius myth, like all of these things are still playing into the way people see themselves as they create. And not all of us want to be or will be superstars, and we shouldn't use the same approach as superstars or the same tools for that matter. It just seems like we've not yet gotten any clarity about who people are as they're making music, and everyone's kind of thrown into the same bucket.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and I think if you look at certain really big artists, they say the same stuff about other artists, right? I mean, you can listen to somebody like Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails talk about how amazing he finds it that Radiohead can kind of not be in the media and do well,
Yeah.
Whereas he feels he has to sort of do all the interviews and talk about his process and talk
so
about
the grass is always greener.
Yeah, and so it's not just independent artists trying to make a living. It's also sort of quite successful artists who have this same problem. But I think you're totally right in the sense that it's important to find the right words. That's why we also need people to do that, and that's why. I mean, one of the things that's shifting and that will shift further is the way that these artists, create their teams, because we're talking here as if, each artist needs their own community, but it's probably much easier if you kind of band together with a couple of people and create like a scene, or whatever you want to call it, and then find more like-minded people who can sit in and around that to kind of prop that up. That's probably a more healthy way to think about this whole community question, is to not have to do it yourself, but to create, a group of people who are doing it together, because it's just more healthy.
And a lot more fun.
Yourself.
It's a lot more fun usually to do things with other humans. Yeah. Mostly. All right.
Mostly.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Maarten to look at the future.
Whoa, the ideas are flying fast on this episode. If you want to follow up on anything we're talking about today, we've made it easy. Head over to musictectonics.com and find this episode on the podcast page. You'll see show notes full of links and a time-stamped roadmap of the conversation. We're not responsible for internet rabbit holes you tumble down in the process. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
All right, we're back with Maarten Walraven to talk now about my favorite subject, which is the future. I guess that's my favorite subject. I don't know. But I really want to spring my favorite question on Maarten, and namely, that is, let's get sci-fi. Let's talk a little bit about what you would love to see? This is your ideal utopian, like future love paradise version of the music. I don't want to say the industry or business, but the music scene, the music community writ large. What would you love to see in 5 to 10 years, or here for that matter?
Yeah, big question again.
That's all I got are the big questions.
Yeah. No, you're good. But I mean, in 5 to 10 years, I hope there's some proper decentralization that's gone on, right? So that if you have a platform that becomes really, really big and popular, that the artists that have made that happen are also sort of a part of it, financially speaking. And we have all the technology to do that, so we should make that happen. And I think, to my last point about sort of the artist team of the future is going to look so different than the artist team sort of today already. We have some great examples in recent years of artists who stay independent and who have a great manager that they have a great working relationship with, sometimes until it breaks down, but who manage to do a lot of things together, and sort of have this fluid team around them. Examples are like Chance the Rapper, or more recently Bad Bunny, or in sort of more indie, well, not that they're all indie, but in the sort of in Web3 you have Verite, and who have all these artists who work together really well with this one person, and you kind of see this sort of stuff extending out a little bit. So you have an artist called Jaguar Twin, who works really closely with a company called Cathedral, which is a creative agency, who have kind of helped him set up his entire world building exercise. And I hope that if we talk about 5 to 10 years, that there will be so many artists, right, to have this capacity to kind of build the worlds that they see around their music. That would be cool. And that means that they have a creative agency. That means that they have a bunch of developers. That means that they have very specific marketing qualities in their teams. It means they have communities that they need to manage. It means all of that sort of stuff. And it's just a totally different setup than what we mostly see right now.
That's really exciting. I really long for music to take on the other dimensions that it's always kind of wanted to pull to itself, in terms of the way music often functions in the imagination, like all the visual realm, the sort of the sensory stuff that when you just hear a recording, you have to kind of reconstruct yourself, though I guess everyone gets to do it a little bit differently. So we'll see what happens. But that's really cool. I like your future. I think I'm going to go visit.
Cool. And then the other thing, of course, is that what's gonna happen with all this AI stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna. I think we're in a place right now where where we've started to reappraise how we value things, that people create, and music is, of course, super interesting in that regard because it's essentially ephemeral. When you hear it, right? But then we've come up with all this recorded stuff, and we have ways of doing that, and we have ways of sort of keeping it as a record. But we are currently revaluing how we treat music, and we do this quite literally in with stuff like NFTs, where if you talk to artists who are releasing NFTs, one of the things you hear back is then when they sold their first NFT, they were, even if it was just like 0.05 ETH, they go like, but damn, that was $80 or something.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of money for one song.
Yeah.
We don't pay that for music. So that's sort of a thing that is happening, and that's something that will get accelerated as we see how the creative processes change with the use of all this new AI technology, which is going to take flight massively. That's all going to be exponential growth in the coming years.
The interest, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that's the way. I mean, I love to think that we will be in much more of a symbiotic relationship with AI. You can already see some of this in literature, in that people are kind of creating these blocks of text that they then edit and change and do all sorts of crazy stuff too. But it's all coming from GPT-3 or some other model. With music, that's already, that's been happening actually probably for even longer. But the discussion is usually either replacement or this is garbage, right? But there's not a lot of talk of this symbiosis that is really what's evolving.
Yeah, and what that will actually be like, I don't think a lot of us can really imagine that yet. And then, of course, the next question to that is, and how we value that is also something we can't really imagine yet, because we don't know, right? But we do know that we're currently going through a phase where we are critically reevaluating how we value art. And I think those two things are going to go in tandem.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Maarten, for joining me today and for tolerating all my big questions.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know you can dig deeper into all our episodes with the show notes at musictectonics.com. While you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference, sign up for our newsletter to get updates, or get the Music Tectonics app for music tech news. Everything we do explores seismic shifts that shake up music and technology the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and find me, Dmitry Vitsa, if you can spell it, on LinkedIn. Bye-bye!
You're listening to Music Tectonics.